The obsidian spire of Xylos was a structure that mocked the very concept of terrestrial architecture. A needle of polished, light-devouring mineral driven so high into the atmospheric envelope of Cygnus Delta that its apex pierced the ionosphere, seeming to anchor the heavens themselves. Within its highest council chamber, where the diffused nebular light filtering through the crystalline roof cast shifting, indigo shadows across the assembled delegates, the air thrummed not with sound, but with the psychic residue of profound, species-wide anxiety. The grand arbiter of the triarchy, Zalarian of the synaptic weave, lowered his sensory filaments, the fine, near-invisible cilia that registered ambient emotional flux, and found only discordance. Sharp spikes of territorial defensiveness mixed with the cold, paralyzing dread of the unknown. Before the dais, 3 massive holographic projections rotated slowly, images painstakingly collected from the fringes of explored space, images of a species designation they had tentatively labeled Terran, or simply humans. These representations, derived from fragmented, highly localized surveillance probes, showed worlds of impossible hydrological chaos, volatile atmospheric churn, and biological forms that seemed aggressively bilateral in their symmetry. Their velocity profile defies established constraints of relativistic travel, stated Viraka, the representative of the fleet imperatives, her voice a low, resonant chord vibrating through the chamber's dampeners. Her 4 primary ocular clusters were fixed upon the projection, showing a single, improbably fast vessel exiting a fold in spacetime near the boundary of the settled hegemonies. Their drive signature is wholly unorthodox, a brutal, almost wasteful expenditure of localized spacetime energy. It suggests not finesse, but brute, unrefined force. They possess a primitive, almost juvenile mastery of the deeper physics. This assessment was met with immediate, sharp refutations from the diplomatic corps. Arcanos, whose species had maintained centuries of non-interference protocols regarding younger civilizations, projected an image of a Terran data burst, a vast, chaotic torrent of structured noise they had only partially decrypted. Their communications are a cacophony. They organize their societies around self-referential mythologies and constant internal conflict. They do not adhere to the foundational principles of unified consciousness. They are inherently unreliable vectors for galactic discourse. To grant them entry to the Concordat, or even prolonged observation within the disputed zones, is an act of profound instability. Zalarian absorbed the conflicting streams of data and instinct. The fear was palpable, a cold sweat on the psychic field of the Council. The humans had simply arrived, not with long, measured probes, not with subtle gravitational adjustments, but with a sudden, almost rude intrusion into sectors governed by ancient treaties. Their arrival was too swift, their appearance too close to the vulnerable nexus points of the Triarchy's resource flow. The synaptic weave, Zalarian's governing collective, struggled to categorize them. They did not fit the established evolutionary matrices. They lacked overt telepathic connectivity. Their reliance on externalized, fragile mechanical shells for interstellar travel suggested technological infancy, yet the sheer speed of their traversal implied a mastery of physics they shouldn't possess. It was this asymmetry that bred the deepest suspicion. They were either fools stumbling upon unimaginable power, or masters concealing their true capability beneath a veneer of barbaric simplicity. "We must proceed with caution," Zalarian projected, his mental signature a carefully modulated baritone cutting through the rising panic. "The history of galactic integration is littered with the debris of empires that misjudged emergent species. Consider the Raxian collapse, a civilization deemed technologically dormant, only to unleash weaponized gravitational singularities during their first contact attempt. The Terrans present an unknown variable of unacceptable magnitude. Ambassador Phelan, your delegation has compiled the psychological profiles based on the intercepted broadcasts. What is the summation of this human ethos?" Phelan, the delegate for cultural interpretation, shifted slightly on his resting armature. His species communicated largely through intricate sequences of pheromonal release, which were translated into the chamber's universal dialect. "Arbiter, the analysis remains fractured. They exhibit extreme intraspecies aggression, yet simultaneously possess mechanisms for profound, self-sacrificial altruism directed towards genetically unrelated kin. Their art, their narrative structures, are saturated with themes of conflict, loss, and transient existence. They seem to revel in their own brevity. They value the concept of individual sovereignty above collective stability to a degree we find pathological. They are volatile, unpredictable, and seemingly driven by chaotic, non-rational impulses we categorize as emotion. We detect no unified governing philosophy beyond survival and a peculiar, insistent need for territorial expansion. Phelan paused, the chemical output suggesting a deep, unsettling confusion. They are not predictable, and in the architecture of galactic stability, predictability is the bedrock. The debate continued for cycles, the projections cycling through images of Terran architecture, structures built to defy gravity, yet seemingly obsessed with the ground, depictions of their rapid resource extraction, their relentless modification of their home biosphere. Every data point suggested a species still grappling with the infancy of unified governance, yet their arrival spoke of galactic competence. The arrogance of the hegemony, their ingrained belief in their own evolutionary superiority, warred violently with the empirical evidence of the Terran vessel's instantaneous arrival on the threshold of their carefully demarcated sphere of influence. Zalarian felt the pressure mounting. The synaptic weave demanded a definitive response, and every proposed course, immediate quarantine, preemptive strike, delayed observation, carried the potential for catastrophic miscalculation. They were trapped between the fear of appearing weak to a fledgling power and the fear of provoking a response they could not survive. Then a new signal arrived. Not a transmission, but an active, deliberate hailing sequence originating from the Terran vessel itself, broadcasting directly across the established, heavily shielded diplomatic frequencies reserved only for high-level concordat interactions. It was a deliberate, pointed bypassing of all lesser security layers. Silence descended upon the obsidian spire, a silence so profound that the molecular vibrations of the chamber seemed to cease. The signal resolved itself not into raw data, but into an audible transmission, rendered by the universal translator into perfectly modulated, calm tones that carried no detectable emotional signature, yet possessed an unnerving clarity. To the governing body of this sector, we transmit in good faith. We are the vessel Endeavor, representing the sovereign Terran polity. We request immediate, direct engagement with your highest authorized administrative structure. We are prepared to proceed under protocols of mutual observation and defined transparency. The composure of the transmission was the first true shock. It was utterly devoid of the posturing, veiled threats, or desperate pleas that characterized first-contact scenarios from lesser species. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of an equation already solved. Zalarian signaled Phelan. Respond, acknowledge receipt, request their stated purpose for intrusion into sovereign space. Phelan executed the mandated protocol, the air filling momentarily with the sharp, precise scent of formal diplomatic inquiry. The reply from the Endeavor was instantaneous. Our purpose is singular, to initiate formal relationship assessment. We are aware of the jurisdictional lines you maintain. We do not seek to infringe upon them, only to establish a framework for interaction. We request a secure, neutral communication nexus be established within the hour. The arrogance was subtle but undeniable. They were not asking permission to speak. They were dictating the terms of the inevitable conversation. Viraka of the Fleet Imperatives bristled, her sensory apparatus flashing warnings of rising aggression. Arbiter, this is unacceptable. They demand direct access before they have submitted to basic threat assessment. They have not even offered justification for their hyperspeed transit. We must issue a standard deterrent response, a localized power drain across their drive matrix to demonstrate the cost of such insolence. And invite a retaliation we cannot model, Zalarian countered internally, focusing his considerable processing power on the enigma. If they are capable of such transit, their offensive capability might exceed the deterrent threshold. We observe the calm. We mirror the calm. Ambassador Phelan, inform them that a diplomatic envoy will be prepared to meet them at the established border station, Outpost 7 Delta, in 3 standard cycles. No sooner. The Terran response, delivered before Phelan's message had fully propagated through the vacuum, caused a wave of profound cognitive dissonance among the assembled delegates. We accept the temporal parameters of 3 cycles for arrival at Outpost 7 Delta. However, we must insist on an equal delegation from your side. Furthermore, for the sake of transparency, we will forward initial documentation regarding our vessel's propulsion methodology and core ethical charter to your central intelligence repositories immediately. We believe in establishing a common foundation of understanding prior to direct physical proximity. The forwarding of technical data before even meeting was an act so contrary to established xenopolitical maneuvering that it momentarily paralyzed the Council. Why surrender proprietary knowledge, the very blueprint of their potential threat, so freely? It suggested either supreme confidence in their structural integrity or a fundamental misunderstanding of strategic concealment. As the vast repositories of the Triarchy began to process the incoming Terran data packets, the mood in the Obsidian Spire shifted from cautious fear to intellectual bewilderment. The propulsion methodology, labeled Alcubierre-type warped field generation, was not primitive. It was theoretically understood by the hegemony's most abstract physicists, but deemed impossible to stabilize without creating destructive resonance cascades. The Terrans had apparently solved the stabilization problem through methods involving complex, highly localized, high-frequency harmonic dampening, technology that seemed less about raw power and more about exquisite, almost microscopic control over gravitational tensors. It was the difference between smashing a lock and whispering the tumblers open. The ethical charter proved even more disorienting. It was not a set of pragmatic laws, but a sprawling document rooted in abstract concepts. The intrinsic value of sentience, the inalienable right to self-determination, and most strangely, a formalized, documented commitment to the preservation of cultural memory across all surveyed species. It was a doctrine of benign, if potentially intrusive, stewardship framed in a language that sounded utterly alien to the hegemony's framework of disciplined, hierarchical order. Zalarian felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, curiosity, edged with a nascent, hesitant respect. These beings were not the barbaric conquerors their swift arrival suggested. They were something entirely different, a species whose technological leap seemed matched by an almost philosophical commitment to structured morality. 3 cycles passed in an agonizingly slow procession of data analysis and internal political maneuvering. The synaptic weave dedicated vast swathes of its processing power to finding the flaw, the hidden trap within the presented data. They found none. The physics held up. The ethics, while impractical by hegemony standards, were internally consistent. The only remaining uncertainty was the intent behind the composure. When the Terran delegation arrived at Outpost 7 Delta, situated precisely on the agreed-upon demarcation line, the scene was framed perfectly for observation by hegemony deep-scan arrays. The Terran vessel, the Endeavor, was unremarkable in form, a long, slightly dull gray cylinder, lacking the aggressive, optimized geometry favored by interstellar powers. It was utilitarian, almost aggressively non-threatening in its design aesthetic. The delegation that emerged onto the sterile docking platform was equally counterintuitive. Not heavily armored shock troops nor cloaked specialists. There were 3 individuals. They wore close-fitting, functional environmental suits, but their helmets were retracted, exposing their faces. They were soft-looking, pinkish-skinned bipeds, their expressions carefully neutral, yet carrying an undeniable sense of presence. They were accompanied by a single, small, box-like drone, which hovered silently, deploying no visible weapon systems, only subtle sensor arrays that swept the environment with meticulous calm. Leading them was a female Terran, whose designation they later learned was Ambassador Valerius. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke not of military training, but of ingrained self-possession. Opposing them stood the envoy of the Triarchy, a crystalline Gethian delegate, Kairel, whose form projected cold, intimidating authority, and Ambassador Phelan, representing the cultural interpretation arm. The initial dialogue was excruciatingly slow, mediated by the universal translator arrays humming between them, designed to perfectly map nuance between vastly different cognitive structures. "We greet you, representatives of the Terran polity," Kairel began, his crystalline structure refracting the station's artificial light into sharp, challenging beams. "We observe your adherence to the temporal agreement. We require immediate clarification regarding the scope and ultimate destination of your intended presence within the established stability zone." Kairel's tone implied that intended presence was a euphemism for unauthorized penetration. Ambassador Valerius stepped forward, her hands held loosely at her sides, a gesture the hegemony analysts noted as either profound trust or utter dismissal of threat. Her voice, modulated perfectly by the translator, carried the same unsettling clarity as the initial broadcast. "Representative Kairel, Ambassador Phelan, we thank you for receiving." Our scope is limited to establishing the baseline protocols for sustained diplomatic engagement. Our ultimate destination is irrelevant at this stage. Our immediate focus is establishing mutual comprehension. We did not arrive unannounced, nor did we arrive in force. We arrived precisely as dictated by the laws of shared interstellar space, albeit with a mechanism that may appear novel to your sensors. Karel allowed a fraction of a second of silence to pass, a deliberate tool of intimidation designed to force the subject to fill the void with unnecessary explanation. Novelty does not negate threat. Your vessel's profile suggests a capability that bypasses established navigational safety thresholds. Why should we accept that this capability is not presently primed for strategic deployment against our infrastructure? Valerius met the challenge without flinching. Her eyes, large and dark compared to the multifaceted optics of Karel, conveyed a level of focused attention that was frankly unnerving. Representative, the reason you should accept this is twofold. First, the propulsion schematics we provided detail a system that relies on internal harmonic coherence. Activating any external offensive payload would necessarily disrupt that coherence, rendering the vessel inert, or, worse, initiating a catastrophic field collapse. We have, in essence, engineered our method of travel to be mutually exclusive with immediate aggression. It is a matter of physics, not morality. This was the first hinge point. The hegemony had considered the possibility of advanced propulsion being a weapon, but the Terrans had presented the antithesis. A system so finely tuned that weaponization was structurally impossible without self-destruction. Phelan, sensing the shift in dynamic, stepped forward. Ambassador Valerius, your ethical charter speaks of intrinsic value. The hegemony values stability and ordered growth. Our civilization has spent millennia eradicating the chaotic variables that plague less evolved species. Your emphasis on individual expression and transient experience seems inefficient, even dangerous, when measured against the requirements of galactic longevity. How does your polity reconcile high-velocity technological advancement with such inherent internal fragility? Valerius inclined her head, a gesture of acknowledgement, not subservience. Ambassador Phelan, your observation on efficiency is noted. The hegemony prioritizes the persistence of the structure. Humanity prioritizes the persistence of the experience within that structure. We do not view our brevity as fragility, we view it as the impetus for action. If existence were eternal, the imperative for discovery, for connection, for overcoming challenge would diminish. Our technological ascent is not divorced from our self-perception, it is fueled by it. We seek to expand our experience of the cosmos before our individual instances conclude. This urgency demands rigorous application of intellect and technology. She then gestured to the small drone hovering beside her. To demonstrate our commitment to non-aggression and transparency, we offer you the core decryption key for our vessel's primary diagnostic logs for the duration of this meeting. This will allow your sensors to monitor energy output, life support integrity, and internal configuration in real time. You will observe that the Endeavor is operating at optimal transit readiness, with no reserve power allocated to offensive systems. We offer this not as a bribe, but as a baseline for trust, a demonstration that our adherence to ethical constraints is not merely rhetorical. The hegemony delegates exchanged silent, frantic assessments. Allowing external monitoring of a starship's core functions was unheard of, a massive security breach in any established framework. Yet, refusing the gesture, after having accepted the technical data, would imply that the Triarchy feared the truth contained within the logs more than they feared the Terrans themselves. Zalarian, observing from the spire, authorized the countermove. Karel, accept the diagnostic link. Establish parallel observation streams. Phelan, engage the Terran on the subject of governance structure. Determine how they maintain internal cohesion without mandatory psychic harmonization. The meeting shifted from tense standoff to an almost academic dissection of two radically different paths of evolution. Karel, utilizing his species' innate capacity for cold, analytical interrogation, hammered at the Terran methodology for resource allocation, finding it wasteful due to inherent conflicts between regional polities. Valerius responded by demonstrating how Terran systems of localized governance, while appearing chaotic externally, encouraged decentralized innovation, allowing solutions to emerge rapidly from necessity rather than being imposed centrally. Your charter mentions a commitment to universal sentience protection, Phelan P. rest focusing on the most philosophical aspect. Yet your history, the data we have briefly reviewed, shows widespread, self-inflicted harm upon your own biosphere. How do you reconcile the mandate to protect sentience abroad with the documented failure to prioritize it at home? Valerius did not look away. Her composure finally fractured, not into anger, but into a profound, weary seriousness. Ambassador, that is the core contradiction of humanity. We are flawed. We learn through failure, often catastrophic failure. The period you observe in our historical record was a phase of intense internal struggle, the conflict between immediate, localized need and long-term, global imperative. We nearly failed ourselves. The very fact that we possess a charter dedicated to universal protection is the direct result of having confronted our own near extinction due to that internal imbalance. We learned the hard way the cost of prioritizing the structure over the living substance within it. We bring that lesson, earned in blood and regret, to the Concordat. We do not claim perfection, only the relentless pursuit of repair. This confession, a public acknowledgement of systemic, near-fatal error, was perhaps the most shocking element of the entire exchange. The hegemony, whose entire political structure was predicated on the notion of inherent, stable superiority, could not comprehend the value of admitting such weakness. Yet in that admission, the triarchy's fear began to dissipate, replaced by a dawning, unsettling understanding. These humans were not simply powerful. They were self-aware to a degree that few species ever achieved, having survived their own self-destructive phase. The breakthrough came when K-Rel, abandoning rhetorical attack for pure engineering inquiry, directed a probe at a specific architectural element of the Endeavor's external plating visible through the hangar viewports. Ambassador Valerius, your external shielding harmonics. They are not energy dissipation matrices, nor are they standard defensive screens. They appear to be resonance conduits. What is their function? Valerius smiled, a brief, genuine upturn of the lips that sent a confusing wave of positive signal through the translator. Representative K-Rel, you have a sharp eye for underlying principle. Those conduits are passive systems. They are designed to absorb and integrate residual gravitational fluctuations from nearby stable structures like your spire or the local star's accretion field, and feed that stable energy back into the ship's primary reactor core to smooth microfluctuations. They are not shields against attack, but stabilizers against the chaotic background radiation of the cosmos. They exist because we prioritize a stable internal environment for complex biological processes, even in transit. K-Rel stared at the projection of the conduits. They were not weapon systems. They were sophisticated, self-regulating environmental stabilizers that utilized the ambient physics of space to enhance efficiency. It was an engineering philosophy focused entirely on preservation and long-term operational integrity, not immediate conquest. They are concerned with the quiet hum of existence, representative, Valerius concluded softly. We do not wish to disturb the silence where we travel, we wish only to join it. The assessment from Outpost 7 Delta, relayed back to the Obsidian Spire, was radical. The Terrans are not predators seeking dominance. They are an emergent power whose primary technological imperative appears to be mitigation of existential risk, both self-imposed and external. Xylarian knew the decision was made, not by political decree, but by the undeniable gravity of engineering integrity. The hegemony had spent millennia building walls. The humans had built mechanisms that turned the walls into supportive architecture. K-Rel Phelan, Xylarian transmitted directly to the envoys, overriding the established channel hierarchy. The Triarchy accepts the Terran proposal for baseline assessment. Extend the invitation. Invite Ambassador Valerius and her delegation to the Spire itself. We must understand the source of this unique confluence of power and restraint. The journey to the Obsidian Spire was swift, yet meticulous. The Endeavor, now under escort by a single, non-threatening hegemony cruiser, a sign of profound, if reluctant, acceptance, navigated the carefully charted corridors of hyperspace. The human delegation arrived not with demands for resources or territory, but with requests to observe hegemony historical archives and to share their internal data models on long-term stellar cartography. When Valerius and her two remaining companions, a xenolinguist designated Dr. Chen and a security specialist whose protocols remained almost invisible to hegemony sensors, were brought into the central viewing sphere of the Spire, the scale of the alien civilization must have been overwhelming. The chamber oval, Ook the planet, a swirling canvas of controlled weather patterns and meticulously managed continental zones, all bathed in the indigo light of the nearby nebula. Valerius looked up, not with awe, but with an analytical gaze that seemed to take in the engineering feats simultaneously. Arbiter Zalarian, she addressed the central presence that the hegemony projected in the room, a nexus of light representing the weave's focus. This structure is a testament to unified will and longevity. Your mastery of material science is evident. Zalarian projected his response, the intensity of his focus channeled specifically to avoid overwhelming the delicate Terran neurology. Ambassador Valerius, your presence here signifies a shift in the known galactic order. We have processed the initial data. Your technological leaps are staggering, yet your societal development appears to have paralleled rather than preceded that leap. We seek the causal link. How did a species so seemingly volatile achieve such objective control over fundamental physics? Dr. Chen, the linguist, interjected, his voice calm and precise. Arbiter, the link is necessity, channeled through rigorous, documented scientific methodology. Unlike species that rely on intuition or inherited psychic structures, our knowledge is cumulative and critically reviewed. We build upon the demonstrable failures of our predecessors, documented meticulously so that no generation is forced to repeat a foundational error. Our volatility, our conflicts, forced rapid, high-stakes problem-solving. When survival was at stake, whether from internal fracture or external environmental collapse, we were forced to innovate with desperate speed. Our capacity for abstract reasoning, combined with our short operational lifetimes, creates a pressure cooker for discovery. This explanation resonated deeply with the pragmatic core of the synaptic weave. They understood the pressure of existence, but they had sought to eliminate the conflict that bred the pressure. The humans had embraced the conflict as a catalyst. The true, large-scale reveal occurred during the discussion of galactic defense strategy. The hegemony maintained its safety through layered zones of overlapping sensor nets, gravitational dampeners, and massive, dormant kinetic deterrents positioned at strategic jump points. They believed this layered defense was impenetrable. Valerius requested access to the ancient, largely inactive mapping data concerning the voids between recognized space. The quiet zones that the hegemony generally ignored, considering them empty or geologically inert. After initial hesitation, Zalarian granted access, curious to see what raw, uninterpreted data the humans would focus upon. Hours later, Valerius returned, flanked by a visibly agitated Dr. Chen. They did not display shock or fear, but an intense, cold focus. Arbiter Zalarian, Valerius stated, her tone instantly shifting to the gravest possible register. The quiet zones are not empty, they are traversed. For the last Terran century, our deep space telemetry, the same passive sensors we use for astrophysical study, have registered extremely faint, highly structured gravitational echoes emanating from the deep void, echoes that possess artificial periodicity. KRL, who had returned to observe this critical phase, projected skepticism. Those echoes are residual decay from the galaxy's formation. They are background noise. They were, Valerius conceded. But approximately 150 standard cycles ago, those echoes began to exhibit a synchronized pattern. They are not decay. They are navigation markers. They are too structured, too mathematically elegant to be natural phenomena. Furthermore, they are being laid down along specific nonlinear pathways that traverse the gaps between major stellar nurseries, pathways that no known, established civilization utilizes. Dr. Chen projected a complex overlay, mapping the faint gravitational perturbations against the triarchy's known hyperspace routes. The human overlay revealed that the Terran calculated pathways intersected the hegemony's established frontier routes at precisely 3 strategic points where the hegemony possessed its most vulnerable, forward-deployed monitoring stations, stations they had long believed invisible to any external observer. These beacons, Chen explained, pointing to faint, nearly imperceptible ripples, are not transmitting data in any conventional sense. They are utilizing spacetime itself as a medium for long-term positional marking. They are laying down a map, and the sophistication required to maintain this level of subtle gravitational signature across vast, empty space suggests a civilization that masters energy economy to an extent that makes even our warp drive seem clumsy. The revelation was a physical blow to the political confidence of the hegemony. They had spent millennia building defenses against threats that arrived violently, announced the presence and offered clear vectors for engagement. They had never conceived of a civilization so advanced that its presence was merely a ghost in the structure of spacetime, a civilization marking territories without ever breaking the silence. Zalarian absorbed the data. The fear returned, colder and sharper than before. The initial threat, the humans, was a known quantity, a volatile but manageable peer. This new entity, the source of the deep void markers, represented a potential threat class that dwarfed the hegemony and, by extension, the Terrans themselves. "Why present this to us now, Ambassador Valerius?" Zalarian queried, the psychic weight of the question demanding absolute honesty. "You have possessed this data for a significant duration. Why reveal a threat of this magnitude now upon first contact?" Valerius met the gaze of the light nexus, her expression one of profound solidarity. "Arbiter, when we analyzed the history of the Concordat and the documented evolution of sentient species, we noted a pattern. Isolated, powerful empires inevitably collapse when confronted with a multi-vector, truly advanced existential threat, precisely because their political structures are designed for internal competition, not unified defense against the truly unknown. We did not come here seeking alliance based on mutual benefit, but based on mutual risk. We did not anticipate your technology. We anticipated your need for advanced systemic integration in the face of a threat that cares nothing for your borders or our propulsion systems." She stepped back, allowing the quiet drone to project one final image, a simulation of the gravitational marker pathways intersecting with the known location of the hegemony's largest, most critical stellar resource hub. In the simulation, the pathways converged, and the resulting simulation of interaction produced a single, devastating outcome: total, unrecoverable structural collapse of the nexus point. "This is not an invasion scenario, Arbiter," Valerius stated. "It is a geological inevitability if these markers are leading to an engineered event. We cannot confront this alone. We suspect your long-range sensor history contains data on similar, older disturbances that we missed. We need your institutional memory, your vast sensor coverage, and your political stability to form a unified interpretation matrix before these markers resolve into an active threat phase." The political tension in the spire shattered, replaced by a terrifying clarity. The humans had not come to conquer. They had come to warn, revealing their ultimate power not through overwhelming military display, but through revealing a threat greater than themselves, and demonstrating the intellectual humility required to seek immediate, comprehensive partnership. Zalarian felt the synaptic weave coalesce around a single, terrifying imperative. Survival transcended ancient pride. "Ambassador Valerius," Zalarian projected, the power of his collective focus directed solely at her. "The Triarchy acknowledges the magnitude of this revelation. We accept the premise of mutual existential threat. We will integrate our historical sensor data with your predictive models. The protocols for complete alliance initiation are authorized immediately." "The hegemony of Xylos stands with the Terran polity against this." He paused, searching for the correct nomenclature for an adversary defined only by subtle shifts in gravity across light years. "This shadow in the void." The transition was immediate and absolute. The decades of suspicion and strategic posturing dissolved into a frantic, species-spanning effort to understand the quiet architects of the void. Hegemony engineers worked alongside Terran physicists, exchanging data streams that only days before would have been deemed heresy. The fusion of hegemony's immense structural knowledge and Terran's mastery of precise field dynamics created a protective theoretical shell around the threatened nexus points. The alliance was forged in the crucible of shared, abstract terror. The humans, once viewed as rash primitives, were now seen as the essential catalyst, the species whose survival instinct was so potent it forced them to develop the precise tools necessary to recognize a threat operating on scales beyond hegemony comprehension. Weeks later, a collaborative deep space probe, a fusion of Terran warp stabilization and hegemony deep scan sensors, was dispatched along the most concerning gravitational vector identified by Valerius. The probe carried no weapons, only instruments of observation, directed by both human and Xylan directives. The probe reached the calculated convergence point. It did not find a fleet, nor a weapon platform, nor a massive stellar engine. It found architecture that defied known physics, a structure of impossible size, a perfect, non-reflective shell, vast enough to eclipse a stellar cluster, yet utterly devoid of energy emission, existing in a state of near-absolute thermodynamic nullity. It was a Dyson structure, not built around a star, but around the very fabric of spacetime, seemingly containing an entire region of vacuum. When the probe initiated a low-power, targeted gravitational pulse, designed only to provoke a minimal reaction and confirm structural integrity, the colossal shell did not respond with energy discharge or defense systems. Instead, from the structure's perfect, light-devouring surface, a single, focused beam of structured, coherent energy, not destructive, but informational, was transmitted back along the exact vector the probe had used. The signal bypassed all known security filters and translated itself directly into the active communication channels of both the Xylo's Spire and the Endeavor. It was not a declaration of war, nor a challenge. It was a log entry. The message rendered in the Universal Translator was brief and deeply chilling. Cycle 78901. Containment field integrity nominal. Quarantine marker array established. Organic infestation detected at Zone 4 Gamma, external barrier breach imminent. Deploying standard reprocessing protocols. Valerius and Zalarian, linked in the command nexus, stared at the final transmission sequence. The shadow in the void was not an emerging power. It was an ancient custodian, a jailer, and the structures they had mistaken for navigational markers were quarantine beacons surrounding something horrific contained within that colossal, silent shell. Arbiter, Valerius breathed, the word heavy with sudden, catastrophic understanding. We were not the threat they were marking. We are the infestation. Zalarian felt the cold, crushing realization settle over the synaptic weave. The hegemony, in its careful isolation, had merely avoided attracting the attention of the jailer. The humans, in their desperate, chaotic expansion, had inadvertently pinged the perimeter. The philosophical rigidity of the hegemony had kept them safe through ignorance. The relentless, chaotic drive of humanity had just announced their presence to the entity maintaining the galaxy's oldest, most terrible prison. The quiet, patient enemy was far older, far more powerful, and its goal was not conquest, but systemic cleaning. The fragile alliance, born of fear, was now the only hope for survival against an order they could not comprehend, a cosmic janitor whose protocols demanded erasure of the very sentience they had just begun to value. The journey into the galactic foreground had not ended in diplomacy, but in the sudden, terrifying realization that the true wilderness lay not outside the known stars, but held carefully captive within the silent structures of the dark.